Apostolic succession is the idea that the authorities in your church have an unbroken line of anointing that goes all the way back to the apostles. In other words, the apostles appointed some people to be overseers, to oversee the church in different cities in the Mediterranean region. And those people laid hands on and appointed other people. And then in their generation, they did the same, and on to this day, that there's an unbroken line of people saying, you're to be my successor, that goes all the way back to the apostles. And because of that, the claim is that we must be the true church. We are the true church because we are the ones whose clergy have apostolic succession. The apostles have appointed some people, and then they appointed people, and then over the generations they appointed other people. And those people today, if you want to get God, that's who you got to get him from. That's their claim to fame, their claim to legitimacy, or I should say, the reason why they say other people preaching other messages, they're not legitimate, because God didn't come through them. And God's got to come through them because they're the ones that have apostolic succession. Now, you can probably tell I don't think much of this idea. I don't. It's contrary to the scriptures. Some people say, well, it's not in the scriptures, but I'm saying it's not. It's contrary to the scriptures. It's not just that the idea of apostolic succession is absent from the scriptures. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that they didn't appoint people, but Paul told Timothy, I believe, to go and appoint elders in every city. So, but this idea that there can be an unbroken line from those people that were appointed just because they appointed someone, those are the ones that God's official church right there, and no one else. For one thing, God is bigger than any church. And to me, the biggest red flag you can have is when a church tells you that God has to work through them. That if it doesn't come from them, it's not of God. Because let me tell you something. I'm telling you, Protestants, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, freelancers, don't care who you are, God is bigger than your religious organization. Okay, let's just start right there. He's bigger than your religious organization. And the claim that of apostolic succession isn't just, the Catholics aren't the only one that have that claim. The Eastern Orthodox also claim apostolic succession, and they're right. If apostolic succession was important, then we can say that the one true church is either the Roman Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church, or both of them. Plus, there was Thomas. There was a couple of those apostles. They went east, and there was a Christian church that was not a part of the Roman Empire Church, which became the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church. They had a split in 1054. But there was a third church towards the east, which is still extant. In the Oriental Church of the East is split into a couple of more. They had their own schism, and they got, of course, much smaller because the Muslim came and took over and forced a bunch of people to convert. But they're still in business. They're still out there, and they claim apostolic succession as well. So if it's important, there are three contenders at least for the one true church based on apostolic succession. But apostolic succession is not important, okay? It's not important. It's just something that a religious system uses to try to control people and to make them think, you got to come through us to get to God. You don't have to go through them to get to God. God is near you. And if you reach out to him, even on your own, without their help, my help, or anybody else's help, if you are sincere, he will answer. And it will be legitimate, much more legitimate than any of these people trying to tell you that God is not bigger than their organization, that God has limited himself to only reach people through their religious club. I mean, we see this is the message of the Bible. This is the message, a theme that repeats in the Bible. Who did God give his word to first? Was it not the children of Israel? Were they not his chosen people to receive both the written word and the living word? So, never mind apostolic succession. That's not even in the Bible. What is in the Bible is that his people were chosen to be a chosen people to receive his word and to deliver his word and to be a light to the nations. That's all in the Bible. And guess what? The message is more important than the people who deliver it. The message is more important than the people who deliver it. They are not greater than the message. The message is not constrained by them. They are servants of the message, and they didn't serve that message well, so they were replaced, weren't they? Not replaced as in replacement theology, but Christ became Israel. In other words, the promises of Abraham are inherited by every descendant of Jacob who kept the covenant. And there was only one, and that was Jesus. And so he became Israel. Like it says in Exodus 4:22, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. That was prophecy, not just a statement of the time. So, and then a new people, the new king of Israel, gathered to himself a new people who would preach the word rightly. Well, gee, what about secession? What about bloodline secession? Hey, we're the Jews. We have the word. It was first given to us. We were the ones appointed to be the light to the nations. You got to come through us. God decided the message was more important, and his son was more important than the messenger. If the messenger wasn't delivering the message right, it doesn't matter who was authorized to be the messenger. The messenger has an obligation to deliver the message right. And Israel was not doing that. They were doing the same thing that some of these churches were doing. They made it about themselves being the chosen people, instead of about him being the chosen one. And we see these Christian denominations doing the exact same thing, making the exact same error, making it about, because every institution will do that. And I would say one of the biggest enemies of the cross today in churches is institutionalism. And what do I mean by institutionalism? I mean that any bureaucracy over time will tend to make its own growth and prosperity its real goal. Regardless of whatever purpose it was established for, over time it will make its real goal its own growth, its own prosperity, and its own importance. And I call that institutionalism. And if there's a conflict between the purpose for which that institution was originally founded and the good of the institution, increasingly over time they take the course of action that's good for the institution and not good for the purpose for which the institution was founded. Now, I would say that the claim of we are the true church because of apostolic succession is one that is based on a gross ignorance of the history, because we know that by 527, when Justinian became the emperor of the East, and that was the only Roman Empire that was around then, he basically demanded the right to appoint the bishops, or to a veto power, I should say, over the bishops. I've got to approve it. I'm the emperor. I've got to approve your bishops. He even traded out a pope. He didn't like the pope. He got rid of him and put someone else in there. So I would ask you, how can you claim apostolic succession? I'm talking to Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics. How can you claim the validity of apostolic succession when there was a secular emperor who was red-handed, and he had a lot of conquest? A queen of dubious character. And how can you say that apostolic succession is valid when you have this secular emperor picking the bishops, picking the popes? And that wasn't the only time either. In the late 1300s and early 1400s, you had the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. In other words, there was a dispute. It was taken away from Rome and put in France because the French kings had the most power then, and they could put a French pope in there who even took the papacy away from Rome and into France. It became very political. And then for a while then, there were two popes. There was a French pope and an Italian pope. And so the idea that this is the apostles' choice echoing through time in this human institution does not fit the history. It doesn't fit the facts of history where early on, when various kings and emperors were on top, they selected the bishops that are laying on hands, and they selected the popes in some cases. They had great influence. So that is the historical argument against it, but the scriptural argument is the overwhelming one. Let's look at that next. Galatians, the first chapter. Let's start with about verse 7, which is not even a gospel. Evidently, some people are troubling you and trying to distort the gospel of Christ. But even though, if we, who's we? Paul's an apostle. Who's we? Even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let them be under a curse. If we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be under a curse. If anyone is doing it, if they wear a elaborate hat, it doesn't matter. If they claim great things for themselves, it doesn't matter. If they have a bunch of fancy cathedrals, it doesn't matter. Even if it's Paul himself, an apostle, even if it's an angel from heaven, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your credentials are. You know what matters? The content of the message, the truth itself. That's what God cares about. Are they preaching the gospel rightly? If they are the successor to the apostles. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you.